John has sent me an Kroeber clock to inspect. He received it for a Christmas gift from his father years ago. The clock worked for many years until he last had it serviced. He hasn't been able to keep it running since. Kroeber started making clocks in the 1860s. This is one of his early ones. It's a nice looking marine clock, the type you'd see on board an 18th century sailing or steamer ship. This is the original fastener on the top. The bottom one has been removed. Two fasteners were always used on marine clocks to keep them stable and from falling onto the deck. It can be a rough ride on a ship at times. The case is made from oak. The back of the case has very deep, rough circular tool marks. These are circular saw blade marks, left behind from when the piece of wood was cut in the rough at the sawmill. A lot of history in this piece. Judging from the radius of the scratches, I'd estimate the saw blade must have been about 3 feet in diameter. There's traces of some writing on the back. It's faint and in pencil. Tough to make out what it reads. It's in cursive. Wish it was clear enough to read. Label's in fair condition. Some recent damage to it that can be seen by the wood with no patina on it. If the lighting is just right, I can see a transparent film of something that has been wiped on the surface. It's on the wood and projects onto the top surface of the label. Could be a clear finish that got wiped over the surface, or maybe the original mounting glue for the label. I'm going to guess it was put on after the label, many years later during a refinishing operation. The hole in the center of the label is left over from tooling when it was produced new. There's some type of putty or filler inside of it that looks like it shrank over the years. To prevent any damage to the label while it's in my shop, I'll use this piece of paper to protect it. Here's a place on the case where it was repaired in the past. For its age, it's in very good shape. The glass is not completely flat like modern glass. It has waves in it. Modern glasses run through a rolling process to get its thickness. Old glass was produced on top of molten lead. It had imperfections and wavy ripples in it. This is definitely old period glass, probably original. I'll use these wood blocks to support the bezel to keep stress off the hinge. It's being held in with a white glazing compound. Period glazing compound was made from calcium carbonate and linseed oil. I would say it's very close to being the original glass and glazing putty. Very nice so far. The putty shows some signs of stress cracks and chips, but just look at the age of this. Here's a stress point where the hinge is. Putty has cracked in it. Need to handle this real gently. The other part of the bezel looks good for its age. It's a brass bezel that has been stamped from a die. Here's a patent date, May 10th, 1850, stamped right on the top of it. This slot in the dial is where the movement is regulated from. You move the regulator to F for fast and S for slow. This is really a nice old piece of marine history. It's a paper dial with a finish on top of it. Most likely a white lacquer paint. Cracks and checks on the dial are from the lacquer and the paper expanding and contracting at different rates. Scratches and scuff marks on the numbers are from fingernails rubbing on them while moving the hands. The hour track and numerals are printed on top of the finish. Best to keep these in a controlled environment to stabilize the different materials used in them. I can see the imprint of brass keyhole grommets that were here at one time. This is an easy fix. The winding holes on the dial indicate a 2 mainspring movement. This setup was used only on the best marine clocks in their day. I see this hand washer has a square in it. Definitely a replacement. Remove these hands and take a closer look inside. This is odd. This bezel mounting screw is covered with metal filings. And this one too. Someone in the past must have drilled out the original fasteners, and their remains are still embedded in the wood case. Actually, a nice dial. I'll close the door to keep it stable. Back of the dial pan looks like tin or zinc. The hinge is a standard common brass hinge that's been soldered to work on this piece. You can see where the brass has been formed around the dial pan. And the latch has been repaired with an epoxy. These 3 fastener holes are pretty rough. Looks like something has been rubbing here on the dial pan. It's coming from this shaft on the movement. Must be real close to it when it's mounted, or the movement was loose at one time. The shaft looks like it has been filed or worked down shorter. The movement appears to be intact. Let's see what type of motion the balance has. The balance wheel is severely out of round. I've never seen one wobble this bad before. This type of balance wheel, with separate steel rod spokes mounting the hub and outer wheel, were in use in the 1600s. They were phased out in the late 1800s. This movement is old. I'll let the mainsprings down. This click is real loose. Now the springs are binding on the wood case. I'll wind them up just enough to clear the case so the movement can be removed. While winding this side, I noticed the click rivet is real loose. A disaster waiting to happen. Movement is held in with 2 wood fastener blocks with grooves cut in them. Common way for mounting movements in the 1850s. Screws are non-matching. I'll make sure they are marked to get back to the same locations. This lower wood mounting bracket has some old wood shims nailed on the sides. A lot of effort to put these on there, not sure of their purpose. Oh, this bracket is loose. Explains some of the circle scratch marks on the back of the dial pan. These wood brackets are sure rough. I'll get these screws back in the holes where they came from. Here's some clear plastic residue on the front plate. True signs of a clock butcher. My guess is it's super glue. They even left a fingerprint in the glue. Not the sort of workmanship any of us like to see. The regulator arm should rotate independent of the cone bearing. Someone has taken the brass friction washer and either soldered or superglued it to the regulator arm. It no longer moves independent of the cone bearing. Every time a person adjusts the rate from the face of the dial, the cone bearing screws in and out. The end shake on the balance staff will continuously be moving around. Not good for keeping good time. Whoever installed this bushing has punched and peened multiple times. Punch marks on the plate, so far away from the bushing I can't see what good it would do. This bushing looks fairly good. This bushing has been installed crooked. It's at quite an angle. The pivot won't extend through the hole. The bushing material is partly covering the pivot end. This is a dial washer, and the hole in it is too large for its application. The teeth on the ratchet wheel on the left mainspring have been hand-worked in the past. They've been filed by hand and are all shaped differently. There seems to be a lot of brass filings here. Looks like something made of brass is getting all cut up to pieces. Not sure where these are coming from, but something is wearing fast, and this mainspring has been reworked. It's got an aluminum rivet in it. This part of the mainspring has a huge tooling burr on it. Someone must have modified it in the past to fit this movement. The hole for the rivet in the mainspring material looks like it was punched instead of drilled. The mainspring metal around the hole is mushroomed. They should have at least filed or ground it flush before installing the rivet. On the right side mainspring, the click spring was installed straight through the hole and pried over sideways. The end of it is hanging through the mainspring side, and this will scar the edge of the mainspring. Amazing. The mainspring arm got bent from when the click spring was put in. These types of click springs need to be pre-shaped and fitted before they're installed. This ratchet wheel is all cut up. The click spring is too loose. It's allowing the click to almost ride on top the ratchet wheel, probably where some of the brass filings are coming from. The rear plate has peen marks on it, same as the ones next to that bushing. Probably the same person. Rear plate where the balance staff is located has been bent inwards towards the balance. The balance wheel needs to be trued in the flat and in the round. I see the balance staff is bent. The pallet and fork shaft is rough, pitted, and looks like someone took a file to it. There's signs of solder on it. Maybe someone used acid flux to do the solder job and the flux wasn't neutralized. Wouldn't be able to mount it in the lathe if it needed to be repivoted. The hour wheel is bent, probably from someone putting the hour hand on too tight. The main wheel arm is also bent where the click spring support wire is located, so that's two arms bent on this wheel. The ratchet wheel seems to be missing its pin. Hope someone didn't solder it on the arbor shaft. click spring slot in click has been crushed next to the click rivet. The collar where it attaches to the balance staff is bent at the same angle as the balance wheel. Maybe it was fitted loose and someone superglued it on without truing it up. Now you can see the bend that's in the balance staff. Must have had some rough treatment. These staves are generally quite rugged. Air gap on the hairspring collet is all chewed up. And you can see the inside diameter surface isn't snug tight up against the outside diameter of the balance staff. It's nested crooked against the balance staff. The fork horns are going to need attention. The balance staff needs to be straight before the horns can be adjusted. The escape wheel teeth look like they've been worked on. Oh, it just locked up. The pallet fork horns are out of adjustment. The pallet fork jumped out of position on the balance staff. The balance staff end shake is too loose, plus it's bent. This regulator being fastened solid against the cone bearing isn't helping matters. I'll see if I can get a little motion in it to see how the escapement is meshing. The thread design and material of the cone bearing on the front plate doesn't match the cone bearing on the rear plate. Cone bearing on the rear plate is made out of a different material. Its design is completely different. Looks like it's the cone bearing from a Westclock alarm clock. Looks like someone used a cone bearing that was too short, and they bent the rear plate until it reached the balance staff. This brass banking pin has been installed to control the motion of the pallet fork. This is a function the pallet fork horns should be able to do if they're in correct adjustment. I see not all the escape wheel teeth are locking correctly on the pallet. Some of them don't lock at all. They immediately contact the impulse face without going into lock position. This will cause the escapement to lock up immediately at that tooth. The escape wheel teeth are not all the same length. A couple short ones are causing problems. I'll put some power on the escapement and see how the escaped wheel teeth mesh with the pallets. Yep, it locked up when the short tooth came around. Another crooked bushing. This banking pin someone installed has super glue around it and it's loose. It's a tapered pin and requires the same degree of taper hole to go in and lock in place. It has super glue around it where it enters the plate. It's a straight through hole and not tapered. Guess they thought they could skip the tapered hole if they used enough super glue. Such a nice little movement to be treated this way. This movement is going to need more than a cleaning and adjustment to get it to keep time again. Here's some of the defects found on this movement. They are all workmanship related.